Without further ado, let's get right into it. I know a couple of our panelists on the first panel have to make a quick exit, maybe slightly before the end of the panel, so let's just get going with it. Matt Vincett from LifeMiles, come on down, as they say. Matt Vaccarella from Radisson Hotel Group Americas, come on down. Jamie Russo from Choice. Jamie, it's been a long time, it's great to see you again. Mark, I don't know, is he? Oh, whoa, look at that! Look at that, literally. Weren't sure, you just flew in from Aviation Festival, yeah? Look at that, Mark has made it. Thanks, Mark. Nikhil from Marriott and Jennifer from Hilton. Come on down, everybody. Grab a seat, make yourselves comfortable. We really do have a star-studded first panel this morning, and the topic... The topic is NextGen Loyalty, what we've learned and how loyalty is evolving, and I couldn't think of a better moderator to lead the panel today than Peter Greenberg, who I'm sure you all know. Peter, come on up, and I'm going to leave it in your very, very capable hands to make these fine folk a little uncomfortable.
Well, thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I noticed nobody's sitting in the first two rows. You're not going to be injured. You can come up here. I'm going to, first of all, before I welcome the panel, I want to go back to what David just said about the elephant in the room. Let's be honest, the elephant has been the room. And in fact, later today, in this world of chaos and confusion and changing rules by the hour, there'll be new rules announced at about 3 o'clock this afternoon again. In terms of where we can go, where we can't, testing, more countries that are closing down, and of course, new rules for the airlines as well. So stay tuned for that, that's going to happen this afternoon. But until that happens, let's talk about where we've been and where we're going in terms of loyalty, perhaps a new definition of loyalty. So let's go back about 18 months, and I'll start with our hotel friends here on the stage. Coming to you right now, Jennifer.
All right.
And that is, because we're here at the Hilton, got to start with Hilton. 18 months ago, nobody was staying in hotels. Occupancies were at single digits. If they were occupancy at all, you had 30% of the hotels that were in technical default on their debt service. It was not a pretty picture. So if nobody was accruing points and nobody was redeeming them, it also gave everybody in this room, in fact, everybody everywhere, an opportunity to reassess their lot in life, their marketing campaigns, throwing out the old playbooks, the algorithms that no longer worked. So in this 20 months that you've had, whether you wanted to do a do-over or not, or a reset, how did you adapt a program and keep it relevant when in fact this is the first time anything like this has ever happened?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, welcome as official host to all of you. Thank you all for joining us today at Hilton. And yeah, I mean, gosh, what a roller coaster we've been on. I was in travel and tourism during September 11th, and I thought that was the hardest, and here we are. So I would say a couple of interesting observations from my perspective. One, I think we became very quickly focused on our top priorities. I don't think we've ever been so focused as an organization, Hilton's a big organization, on the things we most need to do to try to thank our frontline workers. We gave room donation, $1 million room donation, to make sure that our owners were taken care of, and to make sure that our traveling guests that had to travel because they didn't have a choice were also taken care of. And that was kind of priority number one. So we really tried to focus on customer first, flexibility. We extended benefits, status, point expiration, because we knew people couldn't travel. And we wanted to give them the chance for when the time comes to get back on the road that we are giving you an extension of an opportunity to travel with us. But what I would say is that the pandemic has gone on and we've looked at our customer profile, we are still seeing our loyal travelers coming back. So there is a lot of resiliency there, which I think is very encouraging for the future. I think the travel occasions are different. In some cases it's still business, in some occasions it was leisure focused. But so yes, there was a dip. But actually we had a fairly nice return of our core business sort of that we typically get in the door. Again, maybe for a different occasion, but still coming back to us, which is, I think, a really nice glimmer of hope for the future.
Of course, going back to the old school, loyalty equals addiction.
Right.
Right? People are addicted to travel. It's part of our cultural DNA. We just don't want to travel. We need to travel. But how did you actually, and Nikhil, you can jump in here too, how did you actually engage your loyalty base in a way that gave them sort of a security blanket? Because one of the overall consumer problems that happened was that nobody was getting proper information, nobody was getting proper direction, rules changed radically, like they'll do again today. How do you stay ahead of that, or do you?
Yeah,
Thank you. First off, thank you for having me on the panel, and it's nice to be in Hilton.
Thank you.
It's been a while. I used to be a Diamond member just before I joined Marriott. So, but thank you for.
You used to be a what now?
Hilton Diamond before I joined Marriott. So,
Hey, I hear there's status match. I don't know. Is there?
there is a status match on both sides.
Okay.
There you go. But no, thank you for having me. I think similar to what Jennifer just highlighted. I think first order of business was taking care of our associates, right? Making sure the environment is safe for them. So we had a cleanliness protocol established, having masks in our hotels, public spaces with space around them, right? So we did a lot of good things. Owners, again, loyalty is a triangle of not just the program, but our associates and our owners as well, right? So making sure that owners that were financially struggling, how do we help them, right? So that's something we are actually focused on. But the one thing that you brought up is how do you adapt, right? Especially when members were not traveling. We did see a lot of leisure demand. We did see a lot of penetration of our core loyal base, but we wanted to be top of mind for them, right? So even when they were not traveling, and we wanted to stay relevant. And if you think about it, all the things we did with everyday spend. So for example, our partnership with Uber. Like, guess what? You were not staying in our hotels, but you were taking Uber rides. You were ordering food in. So how do we stay top of mind for our consumers? Our credit cards. We offered a lot of promotions to drive more engagement to our credit card programs. We also
We're talking about promoting. Hello. We're going to get microphone rehab today. But you guys can hear me anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But you're talking about promotions that not necessarily apply to a hotel stay, it had to apply to redemption as well.
It had to be redemption. It was your everyday spend on groceries, gas, anything you can think of in your everyday life. So we wanted to make sure that we were top of mind even when travelers were not able to stay with us. And that's how we thought about loyalty in a different aspect, right? Completely different than what 18 months ago what loyalty looked like.
Right, that wasn't part of the playbook.
That wasn't part of the playbook, right?
Is this playbook now going to stay?
I think it definitely will. We did similar things with some of our partners. Amex and our co-brand card was clearly a big play for us in making sure that we're front and center for those everyday spends. We have a partnership with Amazon where you can use your points to buy, to shop, which is great, right, for those sort of everyday purchases. I think we absolutely will continue that. Everybody sort of has cyclical travel, right? And so how do you stay top of mind has always been a problem. It may have been more prevalent in the last 20 months, but is certainly something I think we've always been endeavoring is to stay front of mind. We did a lot with content, and so I think we're still, trying to figure out what's the right role for content. I know that's a session later today to again stay pertinent and relevant. One of the things we did was we released the DoubleTree cookie recipe from a content perspective.
Is that
We had
a secret DoubleTree?
secret cookie. Good. So it's very fattening, first of all. But don't look at the calorie count of a DoubleTree cookie. But we had never released that before, and that was probably one of the most engaged pieces of content, if for sure, that we've ever put out. I think we continue to think about how do we just help be in the lives of our members all the time, and it was out of necessity, but I think it's here to stay for sure.
And let me just continue this on the hotel thing before we get to Aircan and everybody else. You're next, don't worry. And that is this. How do we value the programs now? I'm not talking about how the companies value the programs. We'll get to that later. But how do you value the programs when we're seeing a situation happening across the board, not particular to any one hotel or hospitality provider, where a lot of the services that were provided before are no longer being provided, right? No room service at this hotel, right? I checked into a hotel, by the way, we name names here, it's okay. I checked into a hotel in Chicago, the Hyatt Regency, and the ironic thing about that incident for me was that was the very first meeting they had. It was about 3 months ago, and what was the meeting? The American Society of Travel Agents. And I checked in, right, I just got off the plane and said, hey, listen, can you press my suit? We don't do that anymore. Is your restaurant open? Not anymore. What about room service? Nothing. Zero, but they were charging their regular rate, right? So the question is, and I'll throw this open to everybody, right? To what extent do you run a risk of people devaluing the service that you're offering simply because you're not providing it, and yet how do you charge your regular rates in the process, which also applies to redemption? Who wants to jump on that?
Well, we've noticed incredibly strong demand for redemptions, right? So to the extent that other services may be less or other benefits may be less. For example, airlines had their lounges closed for many months, and we did as well. But people are still very interested in earning the miles when they fly because the demand for redemptions remains super strong. I think we saw that, at least in Avianca LifeMiles, where demand for using redemptions increased, right? Because at least a good segment of the travelers were more reticent to be spending their cash as a result of some of the uncertainty.
But were they redeeming them for flights or merchandise?
Well, initially for merchandise, because they couldn't for flights. I think everybody had an extreme pandemic experience, but I also think each experience was a little bit different. In our part of the world, which was kind of the northern part of South America and Central America, as of mid-March, everything shut down. And briefly after that, of course, we did similar to what the hotels did. We told people, look, don't worry about your status. We're going to extend your status for another year, and made people feel comfortable that we weren't going to do anything silly. We're not going to expire any miles and so on. But then we basically shut everything down. We went into survival mode, and that extended to the society too. In Colombia, people weren't allowed to leave their apartments. Right? Same thing basically in Central America.
Their own special frequent stay program.
So exactly, but they weren't earning points, unfortunately.
An idea though.
A good idea. So, we basically hunkered down until close to the end of next year. We started to open up again, and then another wave hit. And it's only really since, I'll say, February, March, at least in our part of the world, where people started traveling again and started thinking about using their miles, and then they really did. But in that moment, while things were hunkered down and nobody was traveling, we saw a huge spike in non-air redemptions. Of course we did. Yeah.
Now you nodded your head with the extreme pandemic experience.
Yeah. Well, ours was unique. I mean, we went through the same thing that all the other programs did. But on top of that, we actually we split our program in half, and so we went from a global Radisson Rewards program and took this time to actually split the organization, split the company and the program to launch Radisson Rewards America.
Had you been planning to do that before?
We had not been planning to do that before. It was a requirement we had to do. But as it sounds terrible to say, but as luck should have it, it was the perfect time to split a program because we had the resources available to do it. But it also gave us the opportunity to make those tweaks, those pandemic tweaks, that were really necessary or desired on our part to benefit the properties and benefit the members. We launched a new award chart with that, was a big part of that launch, which had fixed pricing as well as dynamic pricing that went down. And so from a redemption perspective and driving redemption, driving business back to the hotels, it was a perfect time to launch that, and well received by the properties to drive that redemption, well received by members because they're receiving less, as you mentioned, during their stays, but they're also paying less from a points perspective. So for us, it gave us that opportunity to do that.
Well, you mentioned dynamic pricing. Did you do that chart in terms of services as well?
Not in terms of services.
There's the problem. Okay.
So, but Peter, I think we should probably stick with this topic because I think that there's the thing about choice hotels in our program. We've never had the luxury of being able to have a lot of hotels like this with multiple services. So our loyalty program has been built on a lot of above property benefits, things like the Your Extras program where we deliver the benefit to customers the second that they check in, a multifaceted redemption program that
so it's a more immediate redemption.
Correct, but then also, recognizing that, our services at our hotels, we don't have the ability to have a lot of upgrades. We don't have the ability to, have, these, extreme breakfasts or pressing services, all of that. So we've had to be better as a program. And I think that that's one risk that we're starting to see play out, that a lot of these full service hotels and other things have used this not, at first it was the customers are asking for housekeeping on demand and so on, but in the old days at a place like this, if I chose housekeeping on demand, I got points. Now I don't even get that. So I think that is a risk for customers. The loyalty program starts with the hotel experience or the flight experience, and are we going to allow that to denigrate? The other part of that is what's going to happen with redemption. We made, and I was part of the decision, I was very adamant at the time, when everybody was in the midst of the pandemic, we started saying we all have to raise capital and figure out things. A lot of people made a probably a very smart decision to go and sell a lot of their points out to credit card companies or anything. which is huge currency inflation, right? And we said, we're really worried if we do that, we're gonna have to devalue our program at the exact time when customers are gonna be evaluating loyalty again. So that was a very deliberate thing on our part to say, we're gonna take the short-term temporary pain so that we don't have to worry about it in the long term. As we start thinking about inflation or all these other things, what's gonna happen to your points? What's gonna happen to your programs if your program is in a position that's not gonna be financially stable going forward, and your hotels aren't gonna be willing to give the same services to your most loyal guests?
Well, let me just go to one particular example that you just brought up. It's not the points, it's the perks.
Right.
Meaning, a lot of your guests, they live for that breakfast. Right?
Yep.
What happened when the breakfast wasn't served?
Yeah, I think you are seeing this. At the beginning, people were like, oh, okay, fine. I get it. I think that we were in a very different position. We're very fortunate with the type of hotels we have. The business travelers, you guys were raising hands earlier, it was your first trip or so on. Our business travelers, a lot of them were sticking with us during this. We had essential workers, we had truckers, we had all of those types of people still staying at our
You had FEMA people.
Not just that, we had traveling
Ladies and
nurses.
gentlemen, my fourth microphone. Whoa, okay.
So I'm pretty loud. What do you need me to do here? Is it on now?
I thought we checked.
He was doing just fine with it off.
If we check this.
All right.
Go right ahead, sorry.
Yeah, all right.
Now I'm too loud.
Yeah, no, we had traveling nurses. We had all of these people who were essential workers who were sticking with us. And then all of a sudden, the leisure travel that you talk about came back. And it was Americana travel. And people were getting to know America again. And that's perfect for our hotels where we've got thousands of hotels within a mile of the highway exit. So, I think that there is a lot of that. And so we started bringing those services back and trying to figure out. And at first it was on a limited basis. And then we're trying to bring back as much as we can as quickly as possible because it is a very integral part of the value proposition for our
Right,
hotels.
they come to depend on it.
Correct.
Matt, you were talking about splitting the program. I also want to speak to what Jennifer was talking about. You can't do that without engaging your owners, right? I mean, they were in bad shape.
Yeah.
So how do you approach them? Nikhil, you can weigh in on this too. How do you approach them to the point saying, hey, by the way, here's the bad news, and by the way, we're splitting the program too. How do you explain it?
It's interesting because when we look at, there's perception and reality, right? And as soon as you talk about splitting the program, immediately both the owners and the members look at it and say, your program's half as valuable. Your program I can redeem or earn at half the number of hotels. Very different than the reality of how our members actually earn and redeem. But going through that, educating them about that, just showing them what is the actual reality of that, and that we still are a global program that people still earn and redeem in a slightly different way. And so it was a big education to do that.
And Jennifer, the same question for you, because one of the things that Jamie just brought up is that I kept on hearing from so many hotel executives, our guests tell us they don't want housekeeping anymore. Well, I'm not one of those guests. You guys any one of those guests? Have anybody here asked not to have housekeeping come in the last 3 months?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, about a half. The other half didn't. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's actually symptomatic of part of the challenge we've all had, is that given this moment in time, people have different preferences and different comfort levels. I have young children, one of which can't be vaccinated. I make different decisions than some of my colleagues who don't have any kids or have older children, right? So the challenge with this moment again is there is a lot more bespoke and unique needs, and some people are not comfortable having somebody in their room. This is their first trip on the road, they're nervous, right? And so I think we want to give some fluidity to that. But I think as time passes and moves on, that actually is interesting, right? We always have unique needs, this is the reality. And so I think as we think about things like dynamic pricing and the ability to provide more choice and control in your stay, I think that is here to stay. I think that actually is what, we hear that often when we do customer research. I do think that is what customers are looking for. And it sort of in a way has started here. Maybe clunky, right? Maybe a little bit more with a hatchet than we would have liked it. But at the end of the day, it's really kind of about personal preference and how do we make people feel comfortable during their stay occasion. So I think it'll be interesting. Listen, our hotel owners want guests in their hotels. So if there's something that's not working and they look to us to say, you're seeing this Hilton across the network. What are you seeing? To help us understand, we see our portfolio, but we want to know what's happening. They do listen, and they do respect the perspective we bring, right? It's going to be important to their business if we're cutting services that actually denigrate the customer experience, because those customers won't come back. So I think some of this will also smooth out over time, but I think choice and control is it's going to come out on the other side as to stay.
Well, this brings me to my next topic. You and I are both nodding here. And that is, I remember when airlines introduced basic economy. And they said, oh, this is a la carte pricing, we're giving everybody choice. The choice to get an estimate for a Diet Coke. That was a joke.
It's a good Diet Coke.
Or basically going up the ladder, right? And what did we learn during the pandemic? That when the airlines got rid of those draconian ticket change fees, the one exemption they made was for basic economy. And the next ratchet up in the fare category was only $30 more. So your insurance policy was to spend $30 more so that you knew if you didn't fly, you wouldn't lose your money, right? Hello, Mark.
Morning, everyone. Hey, Peter. Well, look, so if I could comment first on the last topic about just services being unavailable, I'll tell you what I'm really worried about, and it's an entire travel ecosystem kind of concern, is there's a different willingness on the part of business travelers versus leisure travelers to be comfortable with certain services missing. And if you think about the process of business travel now, particularly international business travel, there's all these different points of friction, and they really start adding up. So you start to kind of think through it, and you're like, well, I'm going to arrive late because that's the only way the schedule works. I'm not going to be able to get anything to eat. I'm not going to be able to get my suit pressed. This is going to be closed, that's going to be closed. My wait for a car ride might be longer than it was before. I have to do a test or X number of tests to be able to cross borders, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's all lumped into the same experience.
Absolutely, and very soon the cumulative sum of those experiences becomes something where you just say, forget about it, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to dial in or just not attend or whatever else have you. So when I think about the services that have been suspended, particularly on the hospitality side, that's what worries me. It's just, is that the straw that breaks the camel's back as someone is thinking about whether they need to take that next trip or not. And it's interesting because it's not a new trend. It's been almost 30 years now that the select service brands in the US have provided by far the best value and the highest rates of customer satisfaction. I mean, I think if you're at a Hilton, you'll find a Hampton Inn guest typically happier than a full-service Hilton guest in terms of overall satisfaction.
They have different expectations.
Different expectations and more consistent delivery. So that's what I worry
That gets
there.
down to a new definition of what is a full-service hotel.
Yeah.
What is it? Somebody has to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I will go back to what Jennifer said. I agree. It's all about choice. In the future, guests want different preferences. I love the example of kids, right? And by the way, at all our luxury portfolio hotels, housekeeping is a core service, and we are not going to remove that, right? At all other brands, we have an opt-in, so it's based on guest preference and the guest choice. So at the end of the day, it's all about choice and what members want in our hotels. Back to the question that you talked about in the future, we will see how the customer demand shifts to more leisure, and how do we cater to that, right? If you want your suit pressed, guess what? Members will have the choice to get their suit pressed. But if you stay in the Ritz-Carlton, you're paying $1,000, of course, you have to get that core housekeeping and your suit pressed as well.
So you give me the suit. You give me the suit. Let's get down to another definition of loyalty, because it's not just about accruing and redeeming, it's about your relationship with the institution, right? So I go back to, there are two words that I hate, and I will share them with you. It's called focus group. And the reason why I hate it is because most focus groups are asked self-serving questions to which the person asking the question already knows the answer to support a thesis which is faulty to begin with. And I'll give you an example of that, which, by the way, relates back to 9/11, which brings us back to today. Right after 9/11, they asked focus groups the following question. And listen to the question, and you'll know the answer. They asked them this within 2 weeks after 9/11. Will you be traveling this year? Overwhelmingly, the answer was no. They forgot to ask the second question. Do you want to? And of course, everybody on this stage knows the answer was yes. But nobody in the travel industry who was asking that question was giving the audience their security blanket to be able to enhance the loyalty relationship. Nobody was letting them know it's okay. So where are we today? What's the subtext of most travelers today? I really want to go, but I don't want to get there and get stuck. and not be able to get back home. Those indelible images of the cruise ships being quarantined, or people not even able to get back and stuck in other countries, is still very much with us, especially in the light of the new variant. So the question is, how do loyalty programs work to communicate that security? Let me give you an example. British Airways right now, and I think American, for their business travelers or their very frequent flyers, have already arranged for them to get tested. It's part of the experience now. They don't have to ask that question anymore. It's part of the deal, right? So what are you doing now to give your loyalty members that sort of a security blanket that will not only enhance the relationship, but will get them back out?
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry. So at some of our hotels, I don't know how much you know, now the US has, you need a test to come inside the country, right? So some of our resorts, particularly in Caribbean, Latin America, we have testing on site, right? So you get a test right on site when you're staying so that you don't have to go anywhere else.
As part of the experience or an additional charge?
I think it's in some cases an additional charge, some cases it's built into the rate. But that's a service that you don't have to go anywhere, especially in countries in South America, Latin America. Why do you want to go outside the hotel boundaries to get a test? So this is a great guaranteed safe way to get a test and get into the country.
And by the way, that rule is changing today.
Yes.
Going to go to 24 hours.
Even more relevant, right?
Yeah.
To have that testing on site so you can check out and get into the country.
Mark?
So we've really done three things. First is, it's interesting, the US is the opposite of Canada in this regard. In the US, most of the travel is domestic. In fact, a small minority of Americans even have passports. In Canada, it's the opposite, where most of the travel is international. And so there's this great big country of all these amazing destinations and things to do, and saying, well, look, if you've got concerns for all the reasons you outlined, Peter, or for whatever else, of leaving the shores, then what are all those options that are undiscovered domestically, and what are all the partnerships and things we can bring to bear to facilitate it? So lots of co-branded hotel offers and other things we've done with the DMOs, et cetera, to pump up domestic and show all those options, make sure it's available, and it has made a big difference. There's certain domestic routes where 90%, 100%, 110% recovered, where internationally Canada's been much slower than the US to open up, where it's still been 40, 50%. That's number one. Number two, we have the most comprehensive set of testing options of any airline in the world. In fact, we do the remote antigen tests, which is available in the US, but we also have remote molecular tests. So PCR fidelity tests that can be done anywhere in the world in under 40 minutes for about 110, 115 US dollars. And that's unique. It just allows a lot more freedom and flexibility. Like, I've been to, I don't know, about probably now a dozen and a half countries during the pandemic, and it can be hard to navigate a foreign medical system. I mean, I speak French fluently, and even over the summer to go figure out where and how to get a test in France, and that you don't have a national health ID and all that, it's not exactly straightforward. So the ability to know that you are traveling with a lab literally in your bag, which is no bigger than the palm of my hand, and that you can do it whenever you want.
And that's something affiliated with Air Canada.
It is. So we actually, we have two OEMs, both US-based companies, and then we wrap it around with a lab as a service company in Canada, all done by telehealth. 200 languages are supported. It takes 5 minutes with a nurse on the telehealth, and then 40 minutes for the test to run its amplification and provide the results.
And for the hotels here worried about guests checking in, one of the things that's also going to probably be announced today is that it's one thing just to talk about the 24-hour window before you get on the plane to come home. You may have to do another test within 24 hours of arriving. That may happen again today. And by the way, is it true that I cannot get on a plane in Canada unless I can show proof of vaccination?
More or less. Canada has implemented a vaccine requirement for travel. There are very, very few exceptions to it. It's something that we are very supportive of. And so now, that goes to my number 3, which is how do you make this experience, I won't even say as seamless or as easy as possible, because the bottom line answer is it isn't, but how do you make it so that it doesn't become an impediment to traveling? It's just something that people are accepting to do, like an immigration check or a security check, which has very much become part of the regular routine or even expectation of travel. And we're fully focused on that as well.
By the way, one of the things that will not be announced today is a vaccination requirement to fly domestically in the US because the cases are still being held up in court. That may happen, but you guys did lead the way on that. Also, Australia did as well.
That's right.
But that's a good example of how you use a loyalty program to engage your base, knowing what the subtext is.
Yeah, so it's interesting, those tests I mentioned, they're only available throughout all of Canada. We have exclusivity really and they're only available to those that are Aeroplan members. So we've actually had
You buried the lead, okay.
we have other airline customers that are enrolling in our loyalty program to go purchase these tests. And it creates a full relationship with both the testing provider and with us. And then obviously that's an opportunity.
And anybody else doing something like that?
No, I mean, I think it's a great idea. Congratulations. In my point of view, I think getting tested in general in our markets is pretty easy. You can get tested in any street corner for the most part, whether it's an antigens test or a PCR. And I actually think that the customers in general now, I think you said it, Mark, kind of think about testing as just a necessary evil, right? If I want to travel, and I do want to travel, I'm going to have to get tested. I think there's a peace of mind element that comes in, which is valuable, of giving them an easier testing avenue. But for us, the most important thing is managing the anxiety about buying a ticket and then having to change it because there's a new wave, right? For whatever reason, needing to change it. And so that's where we focus, is trying to make changes and travel interruptions as easy to manage as possible.
Are any of you incorporating the kind of test that Mark's talking about as a redemption point for your programs?
No.
To get tested?
It's available for redemption of us as well.
I know. Thank you for that self-serving statement. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One additional thing I'll highlight is also contactless check-in. So today, members still have the ability in our hotels to actually check in without talking to a front desk agent. So today, we still hear from our guests that they don't want to be in close proximity with any of the associates. So we have contactless check-in screens so that you can actually...
Do you find that as you go up the price point level, that the higher the price point does want a conversation?
It all goes back to choice.
Because pre-pandemic, anytime I saw a kiosk at a hotel, I ran.
Well, but today the dynamic has changed, right? People don't want to be around, other associates or guests. And so you can get your mobile key. We have about 5,000 plus hotels where you can actually get a mobile key and walk to your room. You don't have to talk to an agent. But if you're with kids and if you want to talk to an agent, by all means, we have the front desk agent right there to assist with any of your needs when you're in a leisure destination or a leisure trip.
No more robotic butlers coming down the hall.
No more robotic.
That didn't work out too well, did it? You know what happened? Remember the robotic butler we did the story on that. You know how long they lasted? About 2 weeks. You know why? Every college kid was in the hall with a baseball bat. Anyway. E2. Anyway. Let's talk about two other things. David talked about the elephant in the room. Here are two more elephants in the room. What was the number one complaint among air travelers during the pandemic? In fact, among all travelers, not just air travelers, hotel travelers, resorts, safari operators, what was it? It was refunds. Their inability to get a refund on a trip that was canceled through no fault of their own, right? Air Canada went through their own issue there, but every airline did the same thing. There is a US Department of Transportation rule on record that predated the pandemic by years, which a lot of airlines ignored. What was the second one? The second highest complaint? Insurance, right? You cannot go online on any airline represented here today and complete a transaction without opting in or opting out of an insurance plan that you have no idea what you're covered for or no idea what you're not covered for. And of course, on page 95 of the website of the insurance company, which nobody ever got to, was the one little clause that said, oh, by the way, we don't cover for pandemic, bye-bye. Right, so you had millions and millions of people angry that they had essentially bought worthless insurance. So how are you working with your partners, the insurance partners who are on your website, and to your loyalty members to figure out a new product to serve a market that is desperately needed, that makes it a benefit for them to still be a member so that they will be covered?
So two things. The insurance we sold actually did cover for pandemics. And it was interesting because when we started refunding, one of the most complex things about implementing refunds was we had to go back and reimburse the insurance companies that had already given refunds to passengers, which was a
double dipping
tricky thing. Exactly. But the other thing we did is we structured a product about, what was it, I shouldn't say halfway through because it's not over, but about a year ago, we structured a specific product for the pandemic that covered the different use cases, getting stuck somewhere, getting sick somewhere else, having an issue in transit, et cetera. It essentially covered everything but testing, travel testing. That's how we handled it.
And I do not know another airline that's done that. Is anybody?
There were on the latter, there were a couple. On the former, I couldn't tell you.
Got it.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, to my question, what is Hilton doing to address those two, elephants in the room?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, we were still very flexible around, we have rate packages available where there's flexibility and cancellation. We allowed for cancellations, particularly in the height of the pandemic. It just was the right thing to do. And we continue to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So I would say that's our main focus. To provide that flexibility when we know customers most need it. I think it gets tricky when people book through an OTA and we have less control. I think that's where we saw some interesting dynamics. That's a whole nother elephant in the room.
Let's talk about that. Let us talk about the OTA, because it's sort of like the Claude Rains character in Casablanca, the OTAs, shocked to find out the gambling's going on and collecting their winnings from the night before. Are they travel agents or not? Anybody want to answer that question?
They are not travel agents.
They're not.
They want to become the next Amazon, where they want to engage with the customer directly, right? They want to build their own loyalty platforms. They want to build the ecosystem that all the brands here have built, right? And I think that's one place.
They're trying to do that without having a conversation.
I'm sorry?
They're trying to do it without having a conversation.
There you go.
Without really engaging their base.
Yeah, and I think this is where the brand companies, and I will speak on behalf of all of us. This is one where we are all unified in the way we want to enhance our value proposition to drive more direct bookings, right? At the end.
Well, beware the law of unintended consequences, because as a result of the bad behavior of the OTAs during the pandemic, guess who came back roaring? Travel agents.
Yes.
Right? Because they could actually advocate for their customers, they could have a conversation, walk them through everything, right? I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, a travel agent, in essence, there's a white glove service there. I mean, that's part of they are your advocate. I think we're looking at a distribution platform when we look at what OTAs are really doing. Once you get to a place where you need an advocate, it's hard to get somebody even on the phone to advocate for you, right? And you have to jump through a lot of hoops. So I agree, they've tried to get into, but at the end of the day, it's hard to replicate the experience, either that a travel agent provides or the experience when you're in the hotel, which we own, right? There's no way to kind of get around that. You've got to walk down to the front desk to get help.
Well, the definition of great service is not when the delivery of the service happens, it's when something goes wrong and how you recover. So here's my experience. I'm lucky enough to be a multi-million miler. I've got 23 million miles. I glow in the dark and I froth at the mouth. So I'm at the highest tier of the US domestic carriers, right? And on many of their mileage partners in the strategic alliances. So I have the double secret number to call to the loyalty program of each airline to be able to make a reservation. All right, last week I was on hold with Delta Airlines on that double secret number I timed it, 3 hours and 13 minutes. And here's the best part of the story, and you've experienced it. What do they tell you when you call up? At the end of this call, please stay on the line for a 2-minute survey on our service. Really? I gave you the survey answer right now. So the question is, how have you adapted to your key customers across the board so that doesn't happen to them when they're trying to make a reservation?
I mean, really, it's increased flexibility for us, right? And driving as much as we can through the direct channels that we own, and really amplifying, because we've always had an extremely flexible policy of cancellation, but educating people that it's there and ensuring that they believe that it's true, right? Because a lot of people don't really understand that.
When you're dealing with a loyalty program that is by definition dependent on loyalty, right? And you're also confronted across the board, everybody on the stage, most everybody in this room, with intense staff shortages that have not been addressed and not been ameliorated. How do you operate a program that is supposed to reward people for their loyalty if they can't get on the phone?
So Peter, I may be in a somewhat more unique position than this because I run all our call center operations and choice. And yeah, I'd say it was a challenge. And I mean, right at the beginning, we were all of a sudden trying to figure out how we're going to send people home to take calls from home when we weren't set up for those infrastructures. How are you going to be able to do that in a PCI compliant way? All at the time where countries where we may have been were having their own versions of rules and shutdowns and everything. But we were also hit with a massive surge of calls for cancellations and everything. So yes, we changed a bunch of policies. So, you asked about refunds. In the past, like a lot of times refunds for us, because we don't own any of our hotels, we have to ask the hotel to process the refund. We've found ways to get into our systems and change our bylaws with our owners that we would do those refunds.
And they were open to that?
Yeah. But it was the right thing to do at the time, and it was an emergency situation. But then, as you're talking about, we have been very active in the management of our call center operations, even our outsourced operations, and to the point where they know our brands very, very well. And so as we were getting into periods, we saw a surge in demand pick up faster on reservations. So we planned for that, and we actually overstaffed to that, and even though we were overstaffed, we still were having a bit of shortages, but we never had call wait times more than a couple minutes. Whereas, we had actually owners of some other hotels who own our hotels ask, can we take their calls for their other brands? We laughed.
Jennifer's laughing.
Isn't it, it's kind of unique to the hotel industry, right? Because our members call the hotel direct, or they can call the central line, or they can go online and do that. So we definitely never had these more than a few minute call waits from a hotel perspective.
We did. We've had some horrible wait times because the amount of changes, the amount of cancellation of capacity with the next wave, and so on and so forth, does create a real problem, a real challenge in the airlines. I too manage our call centers. And of course, one of the first steps was protecting the high-value customer,
sure,
right? The elites. And so, I hope, and I'm pretty confident that we haven't had 3-hour wait times for our elites. But I think part of it is managing the objective problem, and part of it is managing the perceptions, right? I'm shocked by that experience that you had. I'm sure Delta will be shocked when they look.
Well, actually, I was on the phone this morning for 1 hour and 49 minutes with Alaska Airlines.
You're kidding?
I'm not kidding.
So I
timed it.
What we do obviously is we manage different splits, call center splits for different customer types, but then we also manage the tails, right? We're concerned about average waiting times, but we're also concerned about anything that's, a waiting time that's a horror, right? That you might tell a group of people about. And so we track that as well, right? And any time we have a wait time that's over a minute, or over an hour, that's a massive red X on the day.
Well, what happened this morning was I called up and they said, your wait time will be 32 minutes. Give us your number, we'll call you back.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And they called me back in 1 hour and 49 minutes.
One of the things that we did, I think fortunately have a very large workforce from home already for our call center, so I think we were able to manage. There were moments, but I think we were able to manage quite well. But we stayed in very close contact with our call center team to understand what are the calls that are coming in, and then as particularly the voice of the loyalty program, we then tried to use that information to provide as much in details, expectation management we could, marketing messages, clarity in our marketing messages, so that we could try to prevent the call from ever happening. We were able to very quickly on the fly actually, and listen, I ran a content team for many years at Hilton, and we've been working towards this. It's hard. We have a lot of systems across our hotels, but we were able to, during the pandemic, turn on a dime the ability to get pool hours and restaurant hours and all that into an email when you had a reservation sent to you, so that you wouldn't call and ask those questions. So, being able to use the content as a way.
Well, in the world of big data, you can anticipate that.
Totally, yeah. So I think, it's underestimated. I always just think about the call center, such a rich place. They're listening to our customers every single day. I love to hear and read what our call center is saying. So I just think, it's a gold mine, and there needs to be a really tight relationship all the time. I think particularly as the representatives of loyalty and the voice of the customer teams, to make sure that we're constantly responding and helping to kind of manage those customer expectations better.
Or provide the ability to have those transactions in another form. And I think,
which is the best way.
Marriott actually does a very good job of, of solving your problems digitally before getting to a call center. We've looked at it. But I think that you start saying, call centers are, traditionally over the last couple decades, companies have looked at as cost centers as opposed to customer engagement things. The airlines, there's so many, you call because you need exceptions, right? And so we've got to figure out, are those exceptions really worth, the thing, or do you give those to people, or do you give them other means to get through that?
Yeah, I think our philosophy has been investing in tools and technologies, to your point, I think is We don't want to give customers a reason to call us. We want to provide the ability with our app, and our app is pretty well reviewed across the Apple Store, and also just our customers love it. Our members love it, right? You can do everything on the app, requesting an upgrade, canceling your reservation, booking rooms, doing all kinds of things.
But in the world of loyalty, isn't it true that above a certain price point, people do still really want to have a conversation?
They do, and so if you are
Go ahead. I would say it's at all price points.
It is now.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I mean, this has always been the case. I mean, hospitality is hospitality. If you don't want to talk to people or anything like that, you can go to an Airbnb, something like that. You like that experience. Our hotel owners, down to our roadways, people are saying that they want to have that experience with the customer because they have questions, they have things. You want the exception. You want them to know that you are a member because, maybe I'll get that upgrade or a better room or be taken care of. So I wouldn't just say that this is only at the high.
Let's all agree, it's all about the upgrade, okay?
It is all about the upgrade,
Yeah.
but
I think everything relevant. Oh, sorry.
no, I was going to say, but the reality, you're right there, where people think they want all this technology. We find in our properties, they want to know that it's available, but what they actually use is that face-to-face or that phone call to the hotel proper.
Is anything ever different? Because I remember people would put out, I'll only stay at a hotel that has a pool. And the utilization at the pool was 3%.
Yeah.
I'll only stay at a hotel that has a health club. And they brought their own Jane Fonda VHSs along and nothing ever happened. So they like the option.
They like
the
the option.
definition of luxury travel is knowing you have options.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily use them.
But for us, it's the option that's available. It's seldom used. What they want is free breakfast and flexibility and cancellation. And we're finding, because our mix of loyalty members and where our properties are less of these super high frequency travelers, but we're seeing all these new travelers, and so we're having to educate them on all of that. And
Work in progress.
work in progress.
Mark.
Okay, I think everything relevant to our contact centers has been said by my colleagues, but I'll tie it to the last subject you brought up, travel agencies and the OTAs. And so this might be something you don't hear often at Air Canada. We love travel agencies. We love the OTAs. Now, mind you, the economics of OTAs for us in the hotel industry are very different. I'm aware of that. But quite candidly, there's two main reasons. First of all, we are the smallest large airline in the world, pretty much. So we're operating points of sale actively in about 90 countries. We have service to places like Algeria. I mean, we are the largest carrier by far from North America to India. But within India, we are a very, very small brand. So we need local arms and legs and knowledge and brand contacts and referrals and things of that nature to be able to fill up all the capacity that we're sending to places like Algeria or Qatar or India, etc.
And by the way, I do a story every year called Secret Flights. Anybody know what a secret flight is? A fifth freedom flight? Does anybody know what a fifth freedom flight is? Okay, now you know. You used to work at the airline stuff. I'll tell you what it is. It's an agreement between countries that allows an airline based not in country A to fly to a destination where they're also not based in country B without having to go to their home country first. So if you want to go from New York to Milan tonight, you can fly Emirates. In the old days, if I wanted to go from New York to Vancouver, I'd fly Cathay, right? So you've got a lot of fifth freedom flights that nobody even knows about.
We've got some of those. And then, the second reason is servicing. So when something goes wrong, travel agencies, good travel agencies, can take a lot of that pressure off of our internal channels. Our issue is not the travel agencies, it's not the OTAs, it's the outdated technology that doesn't allow us to provide a backup option to service the customer directly if a customer wants to, let's say, start with an OTA and then come to us. And so the answer to us really is moving outside of the traditional rails that the GDS systems have provided and moving to direct relationships with the agency community so that then the reservation is contained on our side. They have access to it. If a customer, let's say, books through Expedia, which we love, we have no problem with, Expedia is a great partner, then the customer, let's say, upon a schedule change or if they want to cancel, can choose to come to our app, our website, our call center, Expedia's website, Expedia's call center, etc., and it doesn't matter. And today, because of the way the GDSs have built their technology, it's very, very hard, without messing a lot of things up, for the customer to start in one channel and then end or continue in another channel. That's the problem.
Is that going to change?
Yes.
How?
We recently signed a deal with Priceline that will take the entire booking group off of those rails and onto a direct relationship, and I expect we'll be announcing many more in the near future.
We talked about full service hotels. Now I want to talk about full service airlines, because we had the pandemic raging, and then when travel started to come back raging as well, May, June, and July of this year, who led the way? It wasn't American, United, or Delta. It was the low-cost carriers, right? It was the leisure market, right? The business guys were staying home. And to what extent did that redefine your loyalty program? It certainly redefined your pricing.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think everybody suffered in the pandemic, as I said before, but not everybody suffered equally. So the full service carriers suffered more, right? And were challenged to aggressively reduce as many costs as they could as soon as they could once the pandemic hit. And I think challenged to think about their business model going forward as well, right? It's likely that we'll continue to have waves like Omicron, but it's also very likely that we'll continue to have pandemics going forward. So I think everybody had to think about their business model, and in my world, that led to us taking decisions to get closer towards a ULCC business model than we would have done without the pandemic. And I think you saw—
That's a tough switch.
It's a very tough switch, and it can't be done overnight. And then you also saw the opposite happening, right? You saw ULCCs smelling blood in the water, right? And reinforcing their loyalty programs, among other things. Spirit is a great example of that. And so,
because they were not necessarily known for great loyalty programs at that point.
No, not at all. But they invested a lot in their program. Late last year. So I think you see the legacies trying to cut costs out. I think their programs will have to be part of that endeavor. It's a tricky balancing act because you need to be attractive, obviously to your base, but even more so in the short term, you need to be attractive to leisure passengers. So I think you'll see programs reducing the requirements for the lower end of their loyalty program, of their elite programs, among other things. But you also will see increasingly tough competition from a loyalty perspective.
Sure. Will it be a race to the bottom with the LCCs leading the way?
I think there will be an overall erosion in the amount of benefits given. Yeah.
The number one audience response to a story that I did in the last 6 months might surprise you. What do we value when we get on the plane? I'll tell you what I value.
Yeah.
I like going from point A to point B and not dying. So when people say, did you have a nice flight? The answer is, yeah, I landed. Come on. Well, hell, I'll give you one.
The Biscoff cookie.
Oh, yeah. And prior to the pandemic, if you got on certain airlines, you got a packet of 2 Biscoff cookies. You know where we're going now? I got on the plane the other day, and they served the Biscoff cookie. It was not only smaller, but only one. So that became our television piece that night. And the audience went nuts because it touched that chord. They all noticed it, but then I talked about it.
Have you ever heard Gordon Bethune's line about taking cheese off the pizza?
Oh, well, Robert Crandall with the olive off the salad. Yeah. Well, it goes back.
Except Robert wanted to take the olive off the salad and Gordon kept the cheese on the pizza, but other than that.
Exactly, he did. The other example was, I used to live on the transcons, going between LA and New York to do, in those days, the Today Show, and now it's CBS. And there was one thing that everybody on that plane on the transcon valued, if you went on the noon flight, the Ice Cream Sundae. Everybody remember that? Okay. So one day, I get on the plane, and they hand me a menu that was mimeographed. Think about that. And there was no ice cream sundae on it. Now, there are only 12 seats up in first. So I said, what happened to the sundae? They said, well, headquarters didn't think it was cost effective. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Let's assume, worst case, you made the worst ice cream bulk purchasing deal in the history of the universe. The maximum cost you could have spent on my ice cream sundae is $3.60. This ticket's $2,000. And I pre-boarded along with the FAMs. And I looked and I said, you know what's going to happen in about 5 minutes? You're going to have a revolution on your hands. And you know what happened? That's exactly what happened. People booked different airlines. They wouldn't book American for 2 weeks because they couldn't get their ice cream. They were paying $2,000 a ticket. So what's the tipping point here as we're coming out of the pandemic? Agreeing that this is a disease and a virus that's not going to be eradicated, it's only going to be managed. How do we manage it? What's the tipping point where you go, we're not taking that off?
Let me take a controversial position on this and see who pushes back. Definitely, I take you at your word that you value the Biscoff cookies and the ice cream sandwich.
Well, I know. I go to Costco. I buy them in bulk now.
And there's other individuals who also value those things, definitely.
Yeah.
But in the aggregate, what the leisure traveler most values is a low fare.
See, but that's not what we're seeing at all. We are seeing, quite candidly, more sales of premium tickets for cash and a lot more in miles than we saw pre-pandemic. And it's coming from different people. In fact, now that
Your redemption levels are going up now.
Redemption levels for premium tickets are higher than they were pre-pandemic. And purchases of premium tickets by leisure travelers, people with leisure patterns, are higher than they were pre-pandemic.
Yep.
Because
Well, now
they want the
there's a-
space, they want the sundae, they want the cookie, and if you're specific.
Wait a minute, you tell me I get a sundae and a cookie?
Flexibility, right?
Hey,
But they also want the flexibility, right? The ability to change.
But they could get the absolutely, but they could get the flexibility in economy. They don't have to get the flexibility in premium economy or business class at
but
first.
how much of that, Mark, is a lot of money lying around on the sidelines, suddenly coming back in, and how much of that is sustainable?
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on one thing that we used to talk about on these panels pre-pandemic quite a bit, which was the emotional connection that you have to the brand and to the loyalty. And you're using the Biscoff cookie. I use, for us, our comfort suites hotels, the waffle. People talk about this waffle, and it is you make it.
So you thought you just had the cookie. He's got the waffle.
I know.
Yeah.
It's the same with Hampton. The waffle's the thing.
Wait, explain this, please, Mark.
He's doing a great commercial for us. Please.
They have the same thing with View.
He's getting excited. He's getting
They have the
excited.
batter pre-measured in all of these mini carafes, and you get to pour the batter, you
got
get to
that too.
close it, you
Close
get to
it.
lock it, you get to press the
Yep.
button, you
Yep.
get to flip it. It's a
Control yourself, Mark.
entry machine in the Alaska Airlines Lounge. You get to be part of it.
But what you're really talking about is that emotional connection.
Right, and so as you're making these decisions, you talk about your soup being pressed or other things. We can't make these decisions solely in a silo of economics because the hardest thing to explain to your CFO is emotional connections and what that payback is going to be until it's too late. You take it away and then
You just hit on it.
revolt. But then they don't necessarily recognize that it was that. So I think that's where we, as people who are advocates for our customers, really need to be pushing back on and saying there are certain things that you have to invest in for the customer experience, because otherwise, you guys have captive loyalty a lot. You guys have that fortunate thing. We
Yeah.
don't. We're always competing across the street from somebody else.
Yep.
So we have to have those different things. But I think it all starts with the customer experience. And if you don't have that, the Airbnbs and those types of things.
Peter, you made this point earlier because you talked about focus groups and how they're useless, right? And using more modern methods of research, you find those points, elements in the experience, which drive the connection that you're talking about, right? Like, just by sitting in a breakfast room or a lobby and observing what customers are doing, what their facial reactions are when that cookie is handed to them at the front desk, although you guys know that, but, that's how you find out.
We just found out about you and the
waffle.
waffle. The syrup. Let's talk about another point of valuation, and that is, for the first time, I think, at least from a mass audience perspective during the pandemic, the world got a chance to finally figure out how much is an airline frequent flyer program worth, right? And airlines...
Billions.
Huh?
Billions.
Oh no, I'm about to say it. The airlines basically mortgaged their programs anywhere between $6 and $10 billion. American actually valued theirs at $34 billion for the purposes of accounting.
Sorry.
That was a real eye-opener, right?
Well, it wasn't. I think the big difference was they were leveraging their program to raise capital through the debt markets.
I'm getting to that.
Okay, that's the big difference, right? And when you do that, you have to put a value on your program, and those processes ended up getting a lot of notoriety, right? But before that, we already knew that the programs were worth billions, right? Because of Aeroplan, right? Back in the
When you sold it, yeah,
2005 and others that did similar. So, but for me, the big difference was, raising a whole bunch of capital, 6 to 10
Very
billion.
quickly, too.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. And what's interesting about that is just forgetting the numbers and the debt that incurs, it's how the financial community embraced it and figured out a way to securitize it
Yeah,
in a better way than it was even their airplanes.
that's right.
Whoever knew that?
Well, they get about 5 percentage points cheaper capital, United did by raising it through the loyalty program than they could have otherwise gotten for the airline. And of course, that capital flows to the airline.
So basically what you're saying is that the loyalty program runs the airline.
The loyalty program cannot exist without the airline.
I think the loyalty program is at the center of every brand strategy, even at Marriott, right? I mean, think about it. We are investing more in our program because it's the strategy, and our owners believe that as well, because what we bring to the table is the high value customers that they want in our hotels, right?
Of course.
And at the end of the day, we have 7,500, 7,900 hotels globally. They fly our flag because of the loyalty program, right? At the end of the day, that's what brings them to the table. And you're going to see more and more of that. And we have about the largest loyalty program in the industry, and that's what they value. They not only value our products, but the program and the customers that we bring to them. So.
You're going to say something, Mark?
I would just loyalty is actually the ultimate horizontal. And it's becoming more and more embedded in our brand strategies and the way we make decisions. I mean, you were talking about how you were reaching out to your channels and understanding customers and then informing your pre-arrival communications based on it, right? So that's operational, that's expectations, it's core brand, it's not points and miles or benefits or whatever, but that's the thing, because loyalty brings in the technology and the data that then allows for the entire product and experience to be thought of or examined or reinvented.
So it's one thing to raise the money in the capital markets, it's another thing to incur the debt. How do you pay that back without devaluing the miles? So we've seen examples of some airlines like Delta that they've devalued their miles to certain markets between 6 and 20%. Where's the tipping point there, also in the hotel business, where you devalue them to the point where it no longer has meaning?
Well, I think that's not so much driven by paying back their debt, right? They were able to raise the debt because they have the economics to withstand that debt. I think the erosion in the value of the mile is coming more because of an overall need within legacy airlines to become more efficient and find profits anywhere.
Are you saying airlines are efficient?
No, they need to become more efficient.
Okay, thanks. Just double checking.
Legacy
Sorry,
airlines need to become more efficient to compete against the ULCCs, right? And
especially now, yeah.
One place where they can squeeze more profit relatively easily in the short term, right, is by devaluing the program. Obviously, in the long term, that has a cost. So I think that's why it's happening, and I won't be surprised if it continues, unfortunately.
Well, that gets into dynamic pricing and changing everything to a fare-based system as opposed to a mileage-based system, which was happening before the pandemic.
Absolutely, and it's gonna continue to happen. Accruing miles based on how much you spend rather than how far you fly, and it's far more efficient for the airline to do it that way. Who loses, ironically, in that typically is the leisure passenger, right? Somebody who flies less often and typically, historically, buys lower fares. They're the ones who lose, and the business traveler wins. Now, we're all competing for the leisure traveler, so that adds an.
It's changed the dynamic.
Yeah.
Most of the U.S. airlines, I feel, are, I think, be careful with my language, I think that they will find that they have gone too far. The hotels have managed this much better, if you ask me. And if you look at the growth of...
In what ways have they gone too far?
Gone too far with devaluations to the program and the program experience, even things like fees and policies, et cetera. And if you look at the growth in U.S. travel cards, because obviously 97% of these billings are coming from FI products in the U.S. If you look at the growth of proprietary U.S. travel cards, they far exceed the growth of the co-branded travel cards. Meanwhile, many of the U.S. carriers have signed mileage transfer deals and other things which really allow for that value to be had indirectly via, quite candidly, third-party products. The hotel chains have been, I think, much more strategic in how they've managed not just their relationships, but also their devaluations. I think if you look 5-10 years from now, it will become clear all of the growth that has been given up.
We have to wait 5 to 10 years to figure that out?
I don't know if we'll have to wait that long, but... I think it's a serious threat. And one more thing, we don't really talk about this that much, but the US programs have now devalued so much, and they are highly sensitized to if there is ever a reduction in interchange rates in the US. And if that starts to happen, which, by the way, with the current administration, or, for example, with some of the, Senate Democrats, Elizabeth Warren is very much a fan, Katie Porter is very much a fan of going down tighter regulations on the payment system. So, without any judgment to whether that's a good or bad thing, of course, just stating facts. If those kinds of things happen and you see revenue tighten up in the US, that's gonna be very difficult financially for these airlines to handle, and I don't know that there's much room left on belt tightening for customers.
Which means it's going to have an impact on the loyalty programs, inevitably.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
No, I was just going to say, as much as I'd like to say that the hotel industry is weathering this a little bit differently, I think they've kind of been a little bit more under the radar with this. But I do think that we're starting to see a bit of a tipping point.
See what you did? You made them leave.
Sorry,
Apologize.
you want
Thank
your
you.
phone?
Yes, that'd be good.
He really wanted to leave.
Talk about service.
Yeah. It doesn't always have to be at the high price point. But when we start talking about things like dynamic pricing, what I feel like has happened, starting with the airlines, and we're seeing it now with the hotel companies, and they're getting, I feel, appropriately, skewered for some of this, is taking away goalposts from customers. We're not telling people anymore how many points it's going to take to get to where you want to go, which is what was so valuable about the airline programs originally. 25,000 miles, I could take a trip. I had that goalpost. If you're a kid and
I used to take great pleasure in stapling my United Airlines coupon.
Right.
To watch the gate agent do that, going, I'm almost there. The mileage runs.
Yes.
Right.
But what you're talking about is a goalpost. If you're a kid and you say, I want a bike, and your parents say you got to buy it yourself, and they don't tell you how much it is, you have no clue how many lawns you have to mow or any of that kind of stuff to be able to get that.
Are you talking about personal experience as a child?
Yes.
Still scarred.
So but we're asking customers to do that. We're saying, hey, there's all these theoretical, beautiful hotels around the world. It could be 150,000 points to get there. Or it could be 200,000, or it could be 100,000, and it's not, without that transparency, I think we're losing the magic within the programs.
No, that's true, which is what we found out as well, which is why we stuck, to buck the trend, we stuck with fixed pricing, so our members always know how much it's going to be, unless it's going to be lower. So our dynamic pricing goes only lower, not higher, because what we heard is they want to know how many times do I have to stay?
They want to know where they stand. They want to know where they stand.
What am I going to get for it?
Jennifer?
We just launched flexible redemptions, and which was our foray into dynamic pricing. So beginning 2022, categories will go away. But the way we've done this, and especially being sensitive to customers, I think you raised a good point. We want to make sure we don't change the goalpost, right? Even though categories are going away, our pricing is going to stay within the bounds of those categories. So if there is a Ritz-Carlton within category 8, today is between 80,000 and 100,000 points, it's going to stay within 80,000 and 100,000 points. So we understand how the pandemic.
Or next year, but then the year after that, it will no longer stay within those rates.
We don't know that yet. We don't want to speculate. But at the end of the day, we don't want to change the goalpost, right? So we want to make sure that customers are coming out of the pandemic. They are frustrated they haven't been able to travel. And to his point, we don't want to change the goalpost on it because we want them in our hotels. At the end of the day, the loyalty program thrives on bringing heads and beds, right? So.
And the sentiment behind dynamic pricing, I think, is right. Because if you're doing it correctly, you should be able to give people more value. Because the way we set point levels in the hotel.
It started with yield management. I mean, really.
Well, the way we set point levels is, especially when people were doing it on a yearly basis, or if you do it in peak and off-peak, is you're taking the average price across that entire period, which means that you have some times where the hotel really needs business and is really low price, but then they have really high peak times. So you are setting your price in here, which is artificially high, right? So you don't get to give people that value at those times. But what we're doing is we're not telling customers it that way. And whatever way that people have gone to market with this, it looks like a devaluation. There's got to be a way to thread the needle somehow to be able to say, and I like that. It's saying, hey, we're going to start here, but we'll go down. There's got to be some kind of way that customers can make it understandable.
And be good comparison shoppers. I'll give you an example. I wanted to redeem miles, to go New York to London in business class. On American Airlines last week, it was 60,000 miles. On Delta, it was 250,000 miles. Duh, right? But if you look on the pricing chart, American was charging exactly the same fare for the same flight that Delta was. So can somebody explain that?
Just on that note, it just so happens that we completely relaunched our program last year, which was, of course, years in the making before the pandemic. But the approach we took is we took the bread and butter awards. So like I want to go in economy with my family to Winnipeg to visit grandma, and those became dynamic. So that we could offer every seat, et cetera, et cetera. But we took the aspirational awards and we kept them as fixed. And so on the aspirational awards, you're really winning the jackpot. You're getting incredible value.
If you wait long enough and do it, you can do it.
It's 6 cents, 7 cents, 10 cents per point redeemed. So you're getting incredible value, and you can save up for it, and you can plan for it, and all of that. But the awards that are not aspirational and typically also lower priced, they're fully dynamic, and you can pick any seat, any flight, et cetera, et cetera. And you talked about positioning that move in such a way that doesn't get described as a devaluation. Well, 5 of the top 5 US travel and loyalty bloggers didn't describe our program changes as a devaluation, even though, particularly for the bread and butter awards, it was more profitable to us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us are in our jobs to actively devaluate a customer experience in any way, shape, or form. So I do think there is a misperception sometimes in some of the mechanical changes that we're making that actually add more value and economically are smarter, that give us to add more value in other places because we're more efficient with how we're managing the funds of our.
So you also have to be able to communicate that.
But we have to communicate that, and I think we've also made loyalty programs very complicated, right?
Really?
Yeah, right. So we have an opportunity, I think, collectively to think about how do we do a better job of telling the story. In our dynamic pricing, which we moved to many years ago, we try to really emphasize there's a cap. We're never gonna. You can expect we'll never go this high, and we have no blackout dates. Where can we make it an asterisk-free kind of any sort of offering that we have?
That's the future for the travel industry. Get rid of the asterisk.
Right. Well, people love the asterisks, right? They game the asterisks is what they really do. But I think that doesn't invite new travelers who are not trying to game the system into these programs, which we all need. We all need future travelers. We all need future growth, right? Road warriors are always going to be there, but that profile of road warrior is going to continue to evolve as younger travelers get in. We've got to think about, I think, approaching our way of messaging to customers and the designs of our programs to be easier for people to understand.
In the time we have left, are there questions from the floor? Yes, I'll bring the microphone to you. And please identify yourself.
Hi, Jim Quilty, full disclosure, Mark, IBS Software. My question was going to be for Matt as well as you, Mark, but since Matt's gone, it's all on you. You can answer for him.
Hey.
Thinking about, I'm going to ask you an example of an investment that you've made, but give us something other than testing for the pandemic. Okay, so when the pandemic hit, thinking about your investment roadmap, what one area were you able to accelerate the most that you felt had the biggest impact? And that's the first question. The second one is, where do you see the growth of engagement and enrollment going forward?
Sure thing. So the history of the program, right, is we had spun it out, sold it off. AMIA, the company that became AMIA, was born out of that transaction. And then, AMIA got distracted with a bunch of other adventures around the world, et cetera, and didn't focus nearly as much in Canada as a result. And so in the 5 years or so before we bought the program back, it had really started to degrade and lost a bunch of partners. But at one point, it was a very powerful retail coalition type program. So one of the things that we really hit the gas on as a result of the pandemic is adding back everyday partners. But we knew that the traditional model of essentially selling points for as many points for as high as possible to third parties was just totally unsustainable, and also was a very one-dimensional model. It didn't provide customer benefits outside of just the points. And so we ended up launching relationships with Starbucks, with Uber Eats, with a number of others that have come about. It's essentially a play on linked loyalty. So for example, if you're in Canada, any Starbucks reward member can link their account with Aeroplan, and then you can choose to engage in either channel, either brand, And you get rewards for both currencies. You get rewards and benefits, actually, not just rewards as a result of it. So that's the thing we really hit the gas on. It's been very successful. We actually just, the liquor store in Ontario is the single largest retailer of wine in the whole world. We launched with them last week. In the first 72 hours, we had 112,000 unique members that engaged in a physical transaction in an LCBO store.
You'll drink to that.
Cheers. And it's 5 p.m. somewhere right now. So what was your second question?
Where do you see the growth going forward, and however you define
Growth? Okay, well.
Engagement, degree of engagement or numbers, whatever's going to provide you the most value.
So I'll answer it in two ways and just be very open and direct about it. Because of the messed up economics and relationship between Amy and Air Canada, Air Canada did everything possible to not acquire members in its own loyalty program for about a decade, which is crazy. If you go to the average US carrier, half of all on boards participate in the loyalty program. Air Canada has 50% more repeat business than American Airlines has. American Airlines, it's about 87% of customers fly once a year. At Air Canada, it's 75% of customers fly once a year. Despite that, we are about 40% lower in frequent flyer penetration. So the quick, easy answer to growth is if you build it, they will come. Actually try to acquire members, even put a half effort into trying to acquire members. This year, we've already acquired about 1.1 million net new actives. The second answer to your question, in terms of engagement, we have a strategy called One More Thing. It's literally a key part of our commercial strategy internally. And it's very expensive to acquire a customer, but we already have millions and millions of customers, whether they're loyalty or not. So our whole goal is get customers to do one more thing, purchase one more ancillary, engage with one more loyalty partner, and then build on based on that. And so that's essentially our engagement strategy at that end.
Thank you, Mark. I'm reliably informed that David has a question.
You know, I'm gonna actually just do one because we're coming to time. I think we could just listen to these guys all day, couldn't we? This is fantastic. What a way to kick everybody off. I saw everybody put their coffees down, they didn't need it. Jennifer, the cookie, thanks for reminding me. You know, I completely forgot that was actually during the pandemic. It's been going on for so long now, people forget the things that happened 18 months ago. But I remember in that first few weeks, Mark Weinstein posted, he shared the post on LinkedIn. I think a lot of us follow Mark. I saw it, I went to the store. You know, I came back with my Clorox wipes and wiped off my groceries, and I cooked up the oven, and well, you know, you can see the result. I should try that again. I don't think my wife will approve, but we should try that again. Jamie, I mean, you and I have been on panels plenty of times before, and I know both of us, we ram about this customer experience, but it's so true. It doesn't matter how good our program is, and don't worry, Mark has more airtime later on to tell you about his program. The fact is, a poor customer experience is going to ruin it for us. Conversely, we can have the best customer experience in the world and no loyalty program, and we'll have rapidly loyal customers, giving us free repeat business if we're in retail, larger basket size, additional attach, all of this. So, you know, I really appreciate you hammering that point, Jamie. I think we forget it sometimes. Some of the terminology I appreciate, you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with dynamic pricing. There's nothing inherently wrong with awarding miles based on spend rather than miles traveled, or whatever the topic you want to talk about when you talk about revenue-based philosophies and loyalty programs. The issue is, how do we message it? Is it relevant? Can members understand it? And I mean, certainly when we talk about earning, is the earning velocity fast enough that the program is attractive and the currency is attractive to members, or else the economics fall apart? People won't take up the co-brand if they're not interested in your currency. It's as simple as that. Mark, mate, you made the point about airlines going too far. I mean, shortly after American made their changes in 2016, they fell short, $25 million. I know that sounds small change now, but at the time, it was huge. They missed their targets because people were not acquiring the co-brand. Now, they've since made a lot of changes and recalibrated, but the point is, United fell short. The fact is, I think there was evidence that they even started to suspect, maybe, you know, that they hesitated. They blinked. LCBO, you know, it's funny, my very first time in Canada, my very first store that I ever encountered, a little sticker on the counter saying you can earn Aeroplan miles, previous incarnation of the program, was the LCBO store. It's an interesting piece of trivia there. And I was impressed by the fact that you could buy your booze and get airline miles at the time. Of course, it was confusing because it was Aeroplan, not Air Canada, and you know we'll talk more about that this afternoon. You know, and just in terms of messaging, I think if we all stop talking about enhancing our programs, that will help improve our messaging to start with. And I know there's a few people in the room that have had me beat their heads around a few times on that one. So if your comms people keep using that term, find some new comms people. We can provide some recommendations. I want to thank our panel. I mean, what a brilliant panel. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for giving up your time. Thank you for the candid comments. One question I do want to just pose to finish up on, and I know we're mainly hospitality, but Mark, feel free if you want to jump in on this one. You guys touched on it, and that is the inconsistent experience on the ground. Peter, you kind of opened the discussion with it early on. And what occurs to me, and what one of my concerns is going forward, is that ultimately one of the goals of loyalty amongst ourselves, and Jamie, you said, we're all across the road from each other on the hotel space, there's not much difference on a commodity level. But if we're not using our programs to drive share of wallet change by actually providing the upgrade, the free breakfast, welcome back, Mr. Greenberg, thank you for being a loyal member, it's great to see you again, blah, 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 blah. This is your 500th night this year, thank you, If we're not doing any of that, because a lot of that stuff just isn't happening right now, as we touched on, it just becomes a commodity, doesn't it? So what's to stop somebody choosing the Hampton Inn over the Courtyard, or the Courtyard over the Country Inn and Suites? Because the reality is I'm not getting housekeeping, I'm not getting breakfast, I'm not getting room service, if I'm lucky, I'm getting to a check-in that isn't 20 people deep. Basically, it's the same, dare I say, average experience in a hotel right now. I know you guys grapple with this one. Can I pose that to you as a final question?
Sure. I'll start, and Jennifer, if you want to chime in as well. Loyalty is an extension of hospitality, right? We are all in the hospitality industry. It's not about what you deliver as a benefit, or it's how you just said it. Like how do we make you feel as a guest in our hotel? And so investing in technology so that the associate at the front desk knows exactly what your preferences are. Understanding, oh gosh, this is your 100th stay. Think about it. Not a lot of our hotels a few years ago knew exactly this was your 100th stay. Yep. And I want to make it special. Even if it's just recognizing, thank you for being a loyal member. That goes miles.
That's spot on. Is those simple little welcome back.
There you go.
This is your first stay or your 10th stay or we've seen you, are you with your family this time, or what that is. But those simple little consistent delivery, if you can't deliver it consistently, as we all know, people get more angry than if you deliver it once in a while.
Absolutely.
So it's that technology.
Make it robotic. I remember my days at Ritz-Carlton, they told everyone with their Credo cards, you could only say my pleasure and certainly. If I went to the front desk and I'm here to blow up the hotel, they'd say my pleasure. So the point is, you have to have that contact the way you're saying it, which gets back to the basic definition of hospitality.
Yeah.
Mark, you want to say something?
No. Laughing.
Oh, no, I just heard there's a syrup truck in the back. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt, Jamie, Mark, Nikhil, and Jennifer. Thank you guys.